So welcome back to another video. Content reuse is a hell of an interesting topic, especially when it intersects with the live service plans that have become so common in this modern era of our industry, of course to very varying levels of success. If you missed out on yesterday's roundup, it went up a bit late, it's worth checking out, it's pretty wild, and there's another one up on this channel as well. And of course the roundups twice per week, and they're there to keep you up to date with all the most important gaming news stories. But as for this video, let's jump into it. Anthem is a troubled game, having one of the worst launches I've seen in quite some time. Unlike with many titles, it wasn't just technical issues, it was actually core design and content, with the game overall feeling very half-baked, being BioWare's worst reviewed title ever. Seeing a celebrated developer go so badly wrong was a bit alarming to many of us, which resulted in this game being held up as an example of modern publisher interference and the tendency of modern games to shoot themselves in the foot with grand plans, grand designs, big business models, arbitrary engagement scheme, roadmaps, and all that jazz. Now, whether that's true or not, what practically matters is how the game was received. It played into a narrative. That's how the game was perceived, and that's what matters strategically for BioWare, and that's what they have to deal with now going forward. Yet throughout all of this, one thing that I think nobody could deny was the unique advantage of their particular form of live service model, that all future content in the game would be available for free. While this was likely a play for microtransaction revenue and for EA Origin Access Premier subscriptions, it does mean that people who did purchase the game can hop back at any time. Of course, contrast that to Destiny 2. It's a fantastic game with Forsaken, Black Armory, and Season of the Drifter adding well-received, I would say top-notch, great quality content. But the problem is, Forsaken costs £34.99 and the Season Pass costs $29.99, with both of them being bundled together for £150 purchase. Of course, most of the audience for that game already paid full price for the game on launch, making the total cost of Destiny 2 £100 for many players, far more if they got the first season pass or any of that DLC. It's a boatload of money that absolutely has restricted that game's ability to re-engage its core audience, even though its endgame is now in a fantastic state. Anthem does not have this problem. If BioWare fix it, then launch day players can hop back into it for absolutely free. I mean, of course, the hidden side to this business model is that they're probably counting on loads of people trying it for a month of that Origin Access Premiere for 15 quid, and then, you know, trying it again for another 15 quid, and that's just pure profit. So, yeah. So it's fair to say that the cheapest way to try Anthem is also one that's potentially extremely lucrative for EA, especially if they flip that £15 per month into an $89.99 per year subscription. But still, Anthem fundamentally is more able to get its audience back than Destiny is, and that is the core of this video. Anthem had two problems. Well, had many problems, but two of the most important ones were the slow rate of reward and the tiny quantity of endgame content, which essentially just boiled down to rerunning the game's strongholds, i.e. dungeons, with one of them, the Tyrant Mine, being far shorter and easier than the others, but still dropping the same quality of loot, making it by far the most efficient one to do, which was a rather bizarre state of affairs. The latest update to Anthem attempts to solve both of these problems. Number one, masterwork and legendary drop rates from stronghold bosses have been increased. Now, that probably is a good thing. BioWare's decision to fix the game's prior loot bug was met with heavy resistance. Of course, it was giving people, I would say, loot so fast that it did sacrifice the longevity of the gearing system, which is especially problematic given the deeply limited design of their loot. But still, in the here and now, players liked it being there and they did not like it being gone. Seeing a buff is good. It probably shouldn't be as powerful as the loot bug was, but unfortunately for BioWare, they've really bungled the execution. This update has not been well received by players, with top posts on the game subreddit decrying it, and with users reporting that stronghold bosses no longer guarantee masterwork quality items, and that many items in chests have been replaced with crafting resources, which seems to be a stealth nerf. Frankly, it's a bit absurd. It seems like a decision that maybe has not been made with understanding of how players actually want to engage with the game. The type of update that is perhaps made by looking at loot acquisition information in aggregate, in terms of the statistics, but not thinking about the on-the-ground user experience. It's entirely possible to increase loot drop rates overall, but still actually have it feel worse for players. And that might seem counterintuitive, but that is the realm of UX, also called user experience design. A spreadsheet can capture the large-scale numbers numbers, but it can't capture how a game update might change how players feel about the interactions that create the numbers that feed the spreadsheet. A higher legendary chance, hey, that's fine, that's great, with them being extremely rare. But if that happens at the same time that you don't guarantee a masterwork item, then that's actually going to lead to a higher number of negative user experiences where they get, say, 4 epics and feel bad. People, of course, focus on the negative more than the positive due to the evolutionary benefits of being a little bit risk-averse in certain situations and kind of focusing on the bad thing that, could be a lion that'll get you eaten, which should be no surprise to BioWare. Now, this guaranteed masterwork issue is something that BioWare have tweeted that they are aware of. A staffer said, basically, that they're investigating the thing. They didn't confirm whether it was a bug, whether it was intended, if this is a design change, if this is them pivoting, but either way, it's something that probably shouldn't have gotten past testing, and loot being replaced with embers from the boxes, well, that also does not seem to be well received. So, we're already out of the gate with a bit of a misfire here, but the next part of this update is an attempt to shake up the endgame content with legendary missions. And while the effort is appreciated, the manner of its implementation once again highlights BioWare's lack of readiness with Anthem, really just showing how much worse of a position they are in now as compared to Massive Games, the developer of The Division 2. Legendary missions are simply just the existing story missions, but harder. Now, what does that mean? Because the devil really is in the detail here, and do note that with The Division 2, we have just seen a game launch with a near perfect content reuse implementation. So, legendary missions in Anthem have their enemies leveled up in their difficulty classification, so a normal might be an elite or a legendary, that kind of thing. Named bosses can now instead spawn as a more difficult to defeat variant or creature, having a better loot table, and then finally at the end of the mission you'll face down an apex creature. That's something like a Titan or an Ursix, which, sadly are both pretty darn boring things to fight in that game. But fundamentally though, the missions are the same, the types of enemies are mostly the same. The bread and butter enemies are the same, they're just tweaked to be a bit harder. And like with all content in the game, they're available on Grandmaster 1, 2, and 3, which is simply just a large health and damage scale. So yeah, I've got to admit, I was interested in legendary missions when I first saw them on the game's roadmap, but now that I've seen them, yeah, I'm pretty underwhelmed, and it's not something that's going to have me back in Anthem. I had been hoping that their level of confidence in the roadmap of this game was down to them having more mission content in the back pocket, but it turns out it's just another difficulty mode. Now, that is something that I could have been okay with if it was done well, and while this is done better than just being a numbers scale, frankly, it's well below what I would expect from a developer like BioWare, especially with the resources at their disposal. First, there's no reason why this could not have been there at launch. And it does make the roadmap seem rather arbitrary, just like the Battlefield 5 one. Of course, another EA Games title which has been continuously disappointing. Second, it's just not interesting from a design perspective, and that is where The Division 2 comes in. You see, The Division 2, like Anthem, has strongholds and missions. The strongholds are miniature raids with harder enemies, with 3 of them being in the leveling and 1 of them being endgame only. And The Division 2, like Anthem, reuses all of that content at endgame. All that leveling stuff, it reuses it, but when you compare the implementation, the level of readiness of both companies is revealed. And why do I say readiness here? It's because I don't think that BioWare are incompetent. Even with an extreme crunch like with Mass Effect 3, they put together a hell of a great game. Obviously, barring the ending. They're clearly a highly competent group of people overall, even though their more recent history has been mixed. So I say readiness, because to me it's very apparent that Anthem just simply needed another 6 months to a year of development. Probably because of a reset or a reboot at some point. Technical messes, they're understandable, but to a degree, the level of design mess indicates, to me anyway, a pivot late in the day. A massive cutback in the game where they just decided they had to work out what the minimum they could ship was on a super tight deadline and just put their heads down and implement that at the very least. And if that is the case, which I do believe it is, that would overall mean that their level of readiness to deal with this game's existence now that it's out in the wild is very low as compared to Massive, who, after their Division 1 experience, very much seem to have went into Division 2 with a solid plan. So in Anthem, it's just a quick level up of the enemies and a mini-boss thrown in at the end, all with a loot system that I think we can all agree is rather poorly designed. In the Division 2, when you get to the end game, all the strongholds and all the missions are invaded by a faction called Black Tusk, and they are best described as a hybrid between Metal Gear, those games, and the real world, like research group Boston Dynamics. So their soldiers have really aggressive AI, they're really strong flankers, they use a wide variety of utility tools against you, and they have robotic dogs, they've got ground drones, they've got air drones. Not only are they numerically harder, they're also fundamentally harder in design, creating a more difficult combat puzzle for the player to solve. Combine that with alternative spawning and with some missions having some of their objectives reworked to be a bit more aggressive, and you have an endgame faction that makes the content reuse feel quite fresh. I mean, hell, they even redo the mission dialogue to lampshade why you are back there at max level and why Black Tusk are there. It's one of the best forms of content reuse that I've seen in a game, and I mean, hell, even look at World of Warcraft, where its Mythic Plus dungeon difficulty has fixes that rotate on a weekly basis, varying the gameplay, with the same actually going for Destiny 2's Nightfall Strikes. Anthem's implementation is far more simple and far less unique. It is on par with a Generation 1 loot shooter, but unfortunately for it, we're now well into the era of the second generation loot shooters, with Destiny 2, Division 2, and Warframe all doing this stuff a lot better. BioWare are now in a position where they need to repair the airplane as they dive towards the ground, and that's a mighty hard task. This game needs new content, but it also needs content that is designed better. They need their reuse to be better designed. They need enemy types that feel a lot more different to fight. They need a fundamentally redesigned loot system that doesn't have all of the Diablo 3 launch problems, which is currently basically what they have. The core gameplay of Anthem is quite cool. There's potential for an engaging world. They're just very, very far away from that. I really hope they make it with this game, and that in a year's time, we can find out, oh wow, this is pretty great. I really wish they had more time to make this game. It really just feels like they got the memo that they had 18 months to get this thing going, and they looked at what Anthem looked like at the time, and basically just said, crap, we've got to put our heads down, and we need to pump this thing out. It's a sad state of affairs for the one loot shooter that, to be honest with you, I was the most excited to try. Of course, there's nothing I want more than for a year or 2 years to pass and for Anthem to be a fantastic game. I suppose the only worry is that if it does not do well now, will EA feel like they should abandon it? Which I think is a very realistic possibility. Just look at what happened with Mass Effect Andromeda. The numbers didn't make sense. They killed their DLC plans, even though that was a game that was basically designed for DLC to be bolted on. So there you go, that's the latest updates with Anthem, that's what's going on. I suppose the other thing is they did add Elysian chests, which, you can get keys for those chests by doing daily things, and you can open them for all your party at the end of major bits of content like strongholds. So I guess that's a nice little thing, but, isn't a massive help. And then there technically is another story about an item that appeared in the DLC store that seems absurd. It's a vinyl that costs the price of a skin. I'm trying to do a bit more digging in that to get more solid information and a response, so you'll likely hear me talk about that in the next news recap video. But anyway, there's your Anthem update. Of course, onto the channel today, we have the major EA Games news, and be sure to check out the recap tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching, and with that, I will see you next time.